Hello, everybody. How's it going? Richard, how are you?
Good. Yeah, not too bad, mate. Not seen you in a long time. Oh, wait. Since Thursday last week, I think
Since Thursday last week.
Thursday last week, yes.
Well, thanks, everybody, for joining us for, what are we doing tonight? Azure Cloud Native.
Yes.
Tonight, we have a good session on Azure App Configuration, so I'm looking forward to that. So
Yeah,
how's your week been so far, Richard?
Yeah, so far so good. Lots of report writing, scans of AKS clusters, making sure they've got the best practices, security, performance, all that fun stuff, really. And doing a bit more research into bad word here, but AWS EKS this week as well.
You redeemed yourself with that EKS bit. It's just managed Kubernetes, right? So
yeah, it's just Kubernetes at the end of the day. It's still cloud native, so it's all good fun.
And if you can manage to get at it through the shell without going through that portal, then all the better,
Oh god, yes, yeah, definitely. But
right.
A lot of JSON files with the IAM rules and everything. It's not as nice as Azure, but yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah. Do you want to talk us through our code of conduct tonight before we introduce our special guest?
Yes, definitely. So, right, in today's session, we ask everyone who's watching live to be aware of others, be friendly and patient, be welcoming and respectful, be open to all questions and viewpoints, be understanding of differences, and most importantly, be kind and considerate to others. And that also goes to not just the live watchers, but people who watch it on catch-up as well. If you're going to leave a comment, please be nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Nice.
So tonight we have a colleague of mine. So Richard's outnumbered tonight with Avanade folks.
Yeah.
We have a colleague of mine.
Too many Avanade.
Matteo Emili. He's the head of software engineering in the UK and Ireland organization. But we'll just bring him in and let him introduce himself because he'll do a much better job of it than I will.
Apparently. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good to hear. Hey, guys. I haven't seen you in ages.
It's been a minute, right?
It's been a month, I should say. I think it was last month last I saw you. But anyway, Thank you very much for giving me time and space to ramble about one of the topics that is really close to my heart, and it's feature flags. Like, talking about something that we should all be doing, and hopefully we're all going to be doing from tomorrow onwards. So I'm Matteo, as you correctly said. I am the head of software engineering for Avanade UK and Ireland, also endless chatterbox, as many knows. Very passionate about anything that's got to do with DevOps and the modern world of engineering practices. Also, Microsoft MVP since 2010, currently through DevOps and GitHub. Number of changes over the years with the candidate, but always been around that area.
That's cool. Good. So we're all MVPs here. So hopefully the 6th of July, we are still all MVPs. Fingers crossed.
Touching wood and every other material that could be customary in all different cultures. I'm Italian. We usually say touching iron. In the UK, you say touching wood. I don't know anywhere else custom, but any material is a good material if you ask.
Yeah, so 6th of July, that's another few days this year again of anxiety and waiting. Actually next Thursday, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, geez, that's closer than I thought.
Yeah, so fingers crossed. But hey, whatever happens, right?
Exactly.
All right. So without too much further chat, we'll let Matteo get into his session. I'm looking forward to this one about app config and feature flags and seeing how it's useful. So if you have any questions, Matteo will pause tonight after his slides to answer some questions before he gets into his demo. So feel free to drop those questions into the chat, and we'll make sure Matteo answers every single one of them.
Yep.
I am keeping an eye on one of the screens to make sure that I have a look at the various comments in there. I'll just do an intro with the slides. It's not going to be more than scene setting, and then we start looking at some code. So it's going to be very much free flowing. I'm not gonna build anything fantastic, but I'm rather going to show you a final result, and then we will reverse engineer it back and understand what happened. Because the topic is simple. The reality is nothing, is nothing really too complicated. There's nothing really too absurd to pick up, and I'm sure that most of the people in the session tonight will be able to get benefit of it.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Right.
Well, let's get into it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, fabulous. No, that's a very good setup. So, as I said, Matteo, I'll talk about Azure App Configuration and feature flags. If you want to get in touch, feel free to get in touch all the time. Like, I love when I get a question I can engage with, a good, challenging thought. Big question, and I'm sure I'm going to see some metaphorical hands. Do you do continuous delivery? And I mean, for real, do you actually do continuous delivery? I'm sure that in an audience of 100 people, I'm going to get a fair few hands up. And that's absolutely right, because the industry as a whole has gone into that direction. We're all gone into the direction of automating everything. We're all gone into the direction of removing manual interactions and making sure that those human traffic and mistakes do not happen anymore. However, if you're doing continuous delivery, think about how often you do that. Because one thing is to say, build CI/CD pipeline, infrastructure as code, and deploy everything automatically, GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps and everything. Yes. If you do it once, you're not doing continuous delivery. You're just automating one process. The reason why I say that is because many organizations still, as of today, still have maintenance windows. And if you have a maintenance window, for whatever reason, okay, if you have a maintenance window to perform a deployment of any sort, you're not doing continuous delivery. Let's take that off the table. Because, yes, you might have everything in place, but continuous delivery is the idea that you continuously push value to your end users. So even if you deploy everything automatically to production, but you don't expose it because you have to flip something, you have to perform some activity that changes environment or whatever, then you're not really doing continuous delivery. And it's interesting because you have organizations like Amazon releasing 23,000 times per day. You have Google, 5,500 times per day. When instead, the typical enterprise, and again, those are all things from the Phoenix project. So I'm not coming up with, with data that comes from God knows which study or whatever. It's the Phoenix project, or something that we all use in the industry as a relatively accepted form of information. The typical enterprise releases every 9 or 12 months. So, yes, you might be doing maybe multiple releases per year. Remember, there are organizations that perform less than one release per year because this is an average. So, how do I get to, well, maybe not the 23,000 releases per day, but how do I get to a point where I can deploy stuff in production without worrying about without worrying about maintenance windows, without worrying about how to make sure that the content or the the feature gets enabled correctly to the users, etc. Because then obviously you're also open to concepts like testing in production and all of those beautiful things that we should be doing. But without having a reliable route to live that is fully automated, you can't do any of that. So the answer to that is obviously using feature flags or feature toggles, feature switches. There's got a number of names that this construct is calling. And it's nothing really new because Martin Fowler has been blogging about it a number of years ago, 2017. And the reality is that as a concept, it also existed from before that. So it's something that's been around for a while. It's something that is not really difficult, despite introducing a small layer of complexity. We'll have a look right now. But at the same time, it's something that gives you enormous control. Because if you can use a feature toggle, a feature flag, it means that you have full control over the componentization of your application. And it doesn't have to be necessarily, microservices first or any of that, because one of the things that, for example, I did when I was doing app migrations and bringing old to new was migrating the application, as a first instance as it was before actually doing anything substantial to it, and put everything behind the legacy feature flag. Over time, then the application gets improved, it gets refactored, it gets migrated to new, re-architected sometimes and everything. And this legacy feature flag gets emptied from content, which means that if at the beginning the application is 100% behind a single feature flag, over the course of a number of weeks, months, and everything, you will be in a position where nothing is behind the legacy feature flag because you modernize the whole application. And that is very powerful because despite having that as a sort of useless feature flag, you have one feature flag, it controls the whole application, it's on and off for the whole system. What's the point of it? You're laying down the foundation for the future. You're laying down the foundation for something that can be improved. So in practice, bearing in mind it's 2023, so from what I heard, everybody does feature flags. There's a number of options that you can pick up. It very much depends on your likings. If we put it into a cloud native metaphor, you have software as a service via something like LaunchDarkly. LaunchDarkly is an excellent feature toggle system which provides you with everything: control plane, UI, endless libraries, for every language. Everything is done for you. It's software as a service. All you have to do is implement the library, add the token, off you go. You build your application with feature. It's very simple, but it says you might want to have the polar opposite, which is IaaS equivalent. And I say equivalent because this is really SaaS. Like LaunchDarkly is a software as a service. This is that you bring in a library, you're building everything. Yes, you rely on the framework and all of that, but you literally have to build a feature store. You literally have to build all of the connections between your toggles and your store. All of these things need to be built. There's a number of libraries that are very, very common and pretty robust, available on the open source world. It is an absolutely valid choice if you want to have complete control, if you don't want to have dependencies on third-party services, if you can't have dependencies on third-party services, sometimes this stuff happens. So that is a very good option for many languages. However, there's an intermediate PaaS equivalent, I like to call it, which is Azure App Configuration. And I really like it because it gives you the best of both worlds, in my view. Yes, you lose some of the ease of use of a SaaS product, but at the same time, you gain from, the experience of using a PaaS product, pretty much like the cloud. So it's an interesting proposition that allows you to build your first feature flag very, very quickly. We'll have a look in a second. And then it allows you to scale on both fronts, configuration and actual feature exposure. I see a question, I spotted a question in the chat about how is app configuration different from Azure App Service settings. So we'll see that in a second, but long story short, it's a completely separate service that runs on its own and provides you with a different capability. Azure App Service settings is literally just settings. So you use it to store static settings. You can do stuff with it, but it doesn't get the flexibility of app configuration. If you bear with me a few minutes, you'll have a look at it. I'm done with the slides. So let's have a quick look. I'm sure you all know this application. This is the out-of-the-box .NET MVC web core application. It doesn't have anything loaded in here. I literally have the home page, privacy page, which is the default values, nothing else. I just changed the name of the portal. And you can tell that there's a couple of things that are different, like the font size, or these AMA configuration setting. And there's going to be more, which we'll see in a second. But just to give you an idea, I did not build a super application that's going to showcase you God knows which feature of app configuration, because it's not a tool that is going to facilitate something at an application level, but it's going to give you that control over feature flags in a very simple way. So if we have a look at the code, we have a look at how it is made, most of the magic happens in the product.js. So if you pick up the default application, what you have to do is to add a couple of nugget packages. So Azure App Configuration, Microsoft Extensions Configuration, Azure App Configuration, and Microsoft Feature Management. The rest of it is out of the box, except for this section over here, where it's going to load your configuration from Azure App Config. So it's going to connect to the service by connection string. We'll talk about it in a second. Bear with me. It's going to select all the all the keys that start with a certain prefix. In my case, I called it end-to-end, just because the demo is called end-to-end, not because of anything else. And also, it's going to configure a sentinel, as it's called. So if you change something, given a certain period of time, the application will reload the configurations. And also, I'm saying that I'm configuring the app to use feature flags. So what I also have to do is to add my middlewares so that I can run them as part of my .NET application. And we'll obviously pick up the format that I want. So in my case, I want to bind a end-to-end settings section, which is going to contain my application settings. Besides that, there's nothing else in the program CS file. Then, if you want to consume settings stored in Azure App Config, all you have to do is to build this class. It's a settings class, which is going to contain the reference to what you are storing as a configuration in App Config. Again, that is all. Now, if you want to take benefit of this, you can start right away, because you build, you deploy, nothing else to do. Yes, there is actually something else to do. You have to generate a token, which needs to be stored into a configuration setting, which I'm going to show you in a second from the documentation. But basically, you need to run this .NET user-secret init, and then setting up the connection string for your application in the app config section. It's going to build it for you right after that. So it's going to give you the opportunity of connecting to the app configuration store, retrieving a token, setting up the token. That's about it. You see, there's nothing else that needs to happen, because once you have it, everything is going to be stored in the app setting. Locally, you can even refer to an endpoint, but the reality is that if you run it locally, it will call your service. If you're running directly in, pass me the term, production, what's going to happen is that your configuration string is going to be stored in the configuration settings, exactly as we were talking earlier, in an app config connection string. So there's going to be an endpoint that is going to be retrieved. That's all. What's going to happen is that your application is going to start talking with your service. And the app configuration service will host your settings. So in this case, you see I use the prefix end-to-end settings and then background color, font color, font size, and message. All of these, let me just go full screen. All of these are stored like a database, because essentially a feature toggle is nothing more than a database system with some connectivity. There are a couple of interesting things though, because yes, you can edit the value of something directly in the editor. It's a key value pair, right? The key is your setting, the value is the value of your setting. But interestingly enough, you can also use it to do other things like adding a keyboard reference. And that is really powerful, because you can start building your connections between key vaults, which could also be used, if you like, as a secret store. Well, it can be used as a secret store. It can also be used as a configuration store. But you can build connections between key vault for secrets, app configuration for your environment configuration, for example. Imagine if instead of having end-to-end settings, you have end-to-end environment settings or anything else, anything like that. That's going to give you the flexibility of retrieving things based on an environment. And you can do that, because all it is enforcing a naming convention. You are enforcing a naming convention around the key. You decide what you need to retrieve and how to retrieve it. That is the most basic usage of Azure App Configuration, to store configuration. This can also be used to then control exposure from a certain area. So typical example of, if my setting is something, then do something, otherwise do something else. All right, that's the easiest thing. Am I talking about just this for tonight? No, because there's a lot more. But this is the most basic use case, which anyone can get started with in a matter of minutes. And everybody can take advantage of it, because it takes away all the management of configuration values, which is really interesting, because if you are doing proper continuous delivery, the last thing that you want to do is worrying about managing configurations manually. you have to make sure that you have one and only one secret store configurations, and it cannot necessarily just be one keyboard. You want to use something potentially more advanced. If we want to move instead towards the feature flag world, and again, feel free to stop me anytime, and I have the questions open for me. But if you want to move towards something more advanced, which is proper feature flagging, then you have to use the other feature, the one that I mentioned earlier when we were looking at the Progress.js, where in the middleware, I added feature management. Feature management is the biggest feature that app configuration has got to offer, because it allows you to do controlled exposure of areas of your application. So if we pick up, for example, this application, we see that there's no beta, there is no beta page. Right? There's a privacy page, but there's no beta page. Cannot be found. However, it definitely exists in the code, because this is the code that is deployed, and there's definitely a beta page. How did I expose that? Well, first of all, your page is nothing, you see, nothing different, nothing special. It doesn't use any specific tag. However, in the backend, it uses a feature gate attribute. This feature gate controls and checks whether this is enabled or not. And it is what allows the user to get there. But obviously, I'm working on an ASP.NET MVC application. I don't want to have the user to manually go to a certain place, or me building something that might be broken at any given point in time. So what feature flags also give, well, feature flags, app configuration also gives you is the opportunity of exposing certain areas of a UI, for example, as features. By adding a feature tag, you control the exposure of your page. That's all it takes to get started with feature flags. There's nothing else. Because in this case, when we go to app configuration, there's going to be a feature in Feature Manager called beta, and it's literally Boolean, nothing else, right? If I enable this, I could probably wait for a few minutes and get it refreshed again, but I don't really want to wait. So I will go to the portal, restart it. Again, Cloud Native, right? So I can restart it as needed. I don't have to worry about doing it in a control way, because I designed it. I designed it in a way that is always fresh at the restart. No, obviously not. It's a simple application. But in a Cloud Native role, you can restart things. You can replace instances. You can make sure that things are more resilient to restarts. And if I pick this up, it is currently unavailable because it's starting up, obviously. But as soon as it's done, obviously, I need to do a demo. Oh, it is starting up. It is starting up. So if I go back to the home page, I should be able to see lighting up my beta feature. Here it is. And it's nothing, and again, it's nothing special, right? It's just a way of controlling exposure. But it's that simple that I don't really see a reason why anyone cannot take advantage of it, especially because if you start looking at how much it costs, we're talking about pennies per batch of calls. I don't remember specifically how much. Let's have a look at the documentation real quick. So let's see if we have, let's see if we got a price associated to it. No, there isn't. But interestingly enough, for example, they ask how is it different from Key Vault? It is different. It's not Key Vault. It's a similar tag. They should be used side by side, because Key Vault stores secrets. Key Vault is not really designed to store settings and other things. So there's no labeling, there's no batch retrieval, there's no UI for that. You can use them together. Can you store secrets in app config? Yes, but it's not going to be the same. Which is, again, an interesting proposition from Microsoft, because it says, we know that you can use it, it is stored, it is secret and everything, but it's not as secret as Key Vault. It's fair enough. I was curious about the cost of app configuration. So we'll pick up the pricing. Now, are talking in USD, very so much. USD, we are talking in standard tier, so not the free tier. We are talking about, obviously availability and everything, about $1.20 per day plus 6 cents per 1,000 requests. And the first 1,000 are including daily charge. Now, even if you don't take advantage of all the other features, geo-replication, network injection, all of those beautiful things that obviously Azure offers you natively, rightly so, but I don't really see a reason not to use it, frankly, because then you can start building all sorts of things directly in production in an easier way. You can do testing in production even with such a simplicity, which is, it's almost disheartening not thinking about an application that doesn't use app configuration. So you see, then you have geographical replica, and that's about it. There's no other cause, because it's essentially another instance. But that's about it. It's not an expensive service, and it provides a lot of value, because the moment you start looking at what it offers besides Configuration Explorer and Feature Manager, bear in mind, Feature Manager, it's simple. It's essentially Boolean, but you can start building feature filters. So with a filter, you can build targeting, so specific groups of users based on active direction or time window or your own. So you can do a lot of things, and you can say, I want certain users to be excluded, certain users to be included. The early adopters, they're going to get these. Then there's going to be another group of users, which might be internal users, and will use another version of the application. Like, there's so much that you can do. You can also do percentage-based allocation, which is interesting, because you can literally do testing in production with a couple of clicks. So you will have a percentage allocation. It will say, you will allocate a percentage to a certain feature enable and a certain percentage on a feature disable. And then you can do whatever. It's really, really powerful. I see a question in chat. Can app configuration be used with AKS, web apps, and functions? Yes, absolutely. Like, Azure App Configuration can be used with pretty much everything under the face of the sun, to be honest. Last I had a look, they had so many examples for all sorts of technologies. It's nothing that's going to tie you down to a certain stack, because it's essentially exposed as an API. So when you go and connect to app configuration, what you're doing is connecting to an endpoint, and the endpoint is authenticated with a key or with Azure Active Directory. So it's literally an API that you call, you embed it into your code, and then you just consume it. Nothing else to do it. And the whole thing that gets interesting is that it supports all of the foundational features that you would expect from Azure. So you can scale as needed, you can replicate as needed, you can have managed identities behind the scenes, all of that. As it is an API, I could run my app in another cloud and use this feature. Yes, it's an API, as I said. So you run your .NET application in EKS, works, no problem. It's not related to the stack. It's not related to anything specific in Azure. It's just a service that you invoke. Another question, are the feature flags automatically created based on the settings created in code, or do those need to be created first and kept in sync finally? So you create them in the store. First of all, you need to populate them in the store. Then you retrieve them, and then you can do whatever, because there's obviously an SDK. You can potentially interact with them. However, the single source of truth remains the store, right? So when you connect to a config and you have to work with it, you can play with the values, but at the same time, the source of truth remains this Config Explorer and Feature Manager. Obviously, API first, so you can do stuff with it. Any more questions? I'm just having a quick look in the background. So I'm sure, again, now that explains how it is different from app service settings, because it does a completely different thing. And very much, I mean, you use app service setting because you will save that value in it, but that's about it. Can it be set up with infrastructure as code? Yes, it's an Azure resource, so it can and it should be deployed with ARM, Terraform, or whatever other choice of infrastructure as code you rather use. Bear in mind that if you deploy it automatically, you might run into a problem where your store name, your resource name must be unique. So when you rerun it, you may run into an error that says the name has been already taken, use another name, but that can be easily worked around. All right. Any more questions? Because the demo, that's about it for the demo. There's nothing else really to talk about. Like I said, it's a simple service that gives you a lot of power, that gives you a lot of functionality. All right.
Awesome so far, Matteo. One thing, it wouldn't be Azure Cloud Native without us mentioning Kubernetes and AKS at least once.
Of course.
At least once. So I have a banner about using app config in AKS with the config map resource type inside of Kubernetes. So have a quick look at that link. It's a preview feature right now, but you can, correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, because I haven't had a chance to play with this yet, but you can point your config map key value pairs off to app config, right?
App config and secrets as well. So because this tool can synchronize with your key vault, as you've showed us, this AKS feature can, as long as you give it permissions to the key vault, it can pull that secret down from the key vault and store it as a secret inside your cluster as well as a config map, which is really cool. Hopefully we'll see it as an AKS add-on at one point, but it's just currently like a Helm chart manifest deployment, but it's super preview.
I think Matteo, you had mentioned already about app config and key vault working together. I think from reading the Microsoft documentation, the recommended way to use them both together is to abstract your key vault away in behind your app config, so that you're not having to reference in your code app config for this and then your secrets to key vault. So reference everything to app config, and it just simplifies the experience, right?
Yes, so and that's because it becomes the single source of truth for anything that's got to do with, with your settings. Obviously, if you're storing a secret, you will know that there's a key vault behind it, but that's an infrastructure detail, if you like.
Yeah. Cool. So we've got a couple more questions, I think.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll put Simon's one at first.
Is it possible to deploy code from Bitbucket or GitHub into the app? Well, I'm using just Azure Web Apps, so it's that. It doesn't have anything to do with deployment. It doesn't have anything to do with the stack that you're hosting it again. So
as long as your code can reach the app config API, then you can use it. Right?
Exactly.
Nice. And then we've got one from Matt as well, which is a good question.
Once a feature is fully in production, would you remove the flag, or do you leave it in so that over time the number just continues to grow? This is the eternal conundrum of managing feature flag, because you either accept a continuous refactoring effort to remove flags, or you accept that you will have a number of flags that over time will grow, and it's going to be up to the architecture of the application to make sure that feature flags are used intelligently. Like you could see hierarchies of features where one feature flag will toggle multiple feature flags cascading down. That is technical debt. Don't do that. Don't get into that mayhem. I'd rather have you refactor the application or use feature flags in a way that are not just tied to a single specific set of features, but it's rather tied to a business outcome. So if you're an e-commerce and you want to toggle the shopping cart because it's broken, don't toggle every component of the shopping cart, like the payment gateway and the user journey and all that. Toggle the whole thing. That would be a reasonable approach. Keep it in line with the logical design of your application, and you will go a long way without technical debt or refactoring. Because otherwise, over time, yes, you have to look at
Sounds good. So when I was watching you click around in the Azure portal, I think I see the word labels come up in the app configuration. What's that all about?
So the app configuration labels, do you still have my screen up?
Yeah, let's get your screen back up. There we go.
Yes. So labels can be used to categorize secrets, which means that if you have a single storage, you can categorize them by potential environment, even if theoretically you should have your own storage per environment, but you can do that. Or you can categorize them by feature type. So if you want to categorize all the user-facing flags under one label, all the infrastructure flags under another label, and so on and so forth. It gives you that flexibility.
An administrator-facing feature then.
Yes.
That's a feature, or yeah.
Yes. And you also have more because you got history, you got locking, you got more features than just storing the string. And interestingly enough, you can set up content type, which gives you the flexibility of storing more than just a string.
Yeah, I like that. I didn't know about the content type bit, so that's really cool to know.
Yeah, no, you can do a lot of things with App Config, and that's why I'm a big fan of that. It's cheap, it's flexible, and it gives you so much value for what it costs that it's literally a no-brainer to put it in.
And if you're, I'm just looking at the networking blade there. So if you're running your main networking,
the usual stuff.
So it's got its private access. So if you're running your application in Azure and you're VNet integrating it in whatever way, why wouldn't you put this behind a private endpoint or VNet integrate it so that it's all private and you're not accessing it over the public API, right?
It's one of those things that is natively designed with ease of use in mind. If you read through, with a private endpoint, public network access will be automatically disabled. Instead, if there's no private endpoint, then you have public network access automatically enabled. So the moment you connect it to a private endpoint, that goes away, and then you can build your own private endpoint as you would expect from Azure standard.
I would quite like most Azure resources to do that because only some of them do. Like I'm thinking like functions and logic app standards and stuff like that. When you enable private endpoint, they automatically disable the public access. But with storage and key vaults and things like that, if you enable private endpoint, it does not. So,
and cherry on top, it also supports system assigned and user assigned managed identities, which means that your deployer managed identity, which should be the only identity touching an environment, can also have exclusive access to the store, so you can perform all the operation by the same identity you use to deploy to your environment.
Nice. Very cool.
Very.
So, and you're using this without naming customers, of course. You're using this in multiple places across the work that you do.
I have, and I will continue doing that because, it's slightly more than probably using a SaaS product, but at the same time, it basically becomes an internal part of your application design. You don't have external dependencies, which could go away at any time or could change at any time. And it's literally like another Azure resource. So another resource that just embed into the design, secure it properly with a private endpoint, off you go.
So as it's just another Azure, can it be deployed per zone or is it zone redundant? I'm thinking like if one of those zones went down, can we still hit it?
Not yet. You only have geographic redundancy, but you don't have zone awareness
yet. Hopefully soon.
Honestly, I could see something like that coming because for obvious reasons, if this becomes a resource type that is used prevalently by certain type of designs, it will naturally emerge as the top of the backlog. Other interesting features, obviously the restore of values. You can do nothing to restore here because I just have the latest values. You can do comparisons. So you can say, okay, against my current store or a different store, so production versus pre-production, for example, at a specific point in time and for a specific label, give me the values that were associated with that.
Right.
Which is really interesting when it comes to testing, when it comes to troubleshooting and forensics, and auditing.
Right. Okay.
So, based off of what you just said, would you have an app config for production, an app config for dev test, and then one for acceptance, or would you just have one and then use labels or another feature to?
I would have one app configuration associated with the level of overhead that you are inclined to tolerate. So if you want to do it completely independent, you will have your own app config per environment, but then you have to manage potentially synchronization across the three. Doable, no problem. You don't want to do that, you use a single one, you accept that it becomes a single point of failure, however, it gives you the single entry point. It's essentially the same conversation as I want an environment done in a certain way or in another way, right? But it gives you the flexibility to do both because the controlling it by the code is trivial. So ideally, it should be against one app configuration per environment, because even when you use in the code, you use this, you are referring to the beta feature. The beta feature will only exist as an entity into a store. So you can't have prefixes here, things like that. But you can always work around, obviously, because essentially you're building a naming convention.
Yeah, sounds good.
I noticed Dapper has a component spec for app configuration. Have you played with that?
I haven't used that, but I'm glad to hear that because Dapper is perfect for this use case.
So, I mean, Dapper, if you tune into Richard and I's podcast in a couple of weeks, we have an individual from Diagrid, right, Richard, coming on to talk all about Dapper. So a lot of time to talk Dapper on this show and on any show that we're on in general, but it really is an impressive technology. It really is that intermediate API layer to allow you to build those cloud native apps, so you don't have to worry about sorry, let me rephrase that. You don't have to worry so much about the services with that intermediate API layer. So yeah.
The building blocks of microservices.
Have you had a chance to use Dapper much in general, Matteo? Or
I used it a couple of times in relatively simple projects and playground applications. I'm a big fan, to be honest. And a friend of mine, Dutch MVP, is very, very big in the area. Like the moment I saw his session, what was it, a year ago? He just honestly turned on the light bulb and started using it wherever I could.
Was that Mark?
Dutch MVP Mark? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's Michael Kumpus.
Good to know. I'll try and find him and look at his talk.
We'll follow him on socials now and watch his content. All right. Have we any more questions because we could talk cloud native and app config and Azure for hours. So have we any more questions in the chat?
Looking now, I can't see any new questions. We did have some weird one from Twitch, because if people don't know, we are actually on Twitch as well as YouTube. But that's just some weird promo thing.
This may be the last month we're on Twitch because nobody watches us over there at all. So
no, they really don't. We are on it.
But yeah,
no, I think that's everything.
Awesome. Any parting thoughts on app config, cloud native development in Azure? Any parting thoughts, Matteo?
Well, my usual remark is use whatever you have available. Don't just stick to what is the status quo. Cloud native is new and it's different. So take advantage of what you've got and make sure that you make the most of the new stuff that you have available because it's native, right? So it's done like that for a reason.
Cool. We do have one more question by the looks of it.
Which is, let's see. Can we use Java Spring profiles in app configuration? Good question. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Okay, that off to Google later for that one, I think.
Yes.
Okay, right. Matteo, Awesome,
All right,
as
folks.
always. Thank you very much. Appreciate your
Pleasure
time.
to be here, and hope to find another slot in the next few months.
Sure, no problem. Well, I'll do another user group you can join. No problem. Richard, great to see you.
And you too, mate. Good to see you,
folks. Thanks for joining us tonight. Look out for details on our next session next month, which will release in the next day or two. And also, if there's any new speakers watching tonight, we are running a session in the next few weeks, probably teaming up with LDNA, where we will do a new speaker specific night where you come on, you do your lightning talks, and generally get encouraged and get your content out there. So look out for details on that as well. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Chisel.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.